The sun hammered down on the Arizona desert like a blacksmith's anvil, turning the sand into waves of shimmering heat. Jack Morrison had been riding for 3 days straight, his horse Thunder moving at a steady pace across the unforgiving landscape. He was heading to Silver Creek to start fresh, leaving behind a past that haunted him like a shadow he couldn't shake. The war had taken everything from him, his family, his land, his hope. All he had left was his horse, his rifle, and a determination to disappear into the vast emptiness of the West. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sand and rock broken only by scattered cacti and the occasional skeleton of a dead tree. Jack had learned to love this isolation. Out here, nobody asked questions. Nobody knew about the battles he'd fought or the friends he'd buried. The silence was his companion, and he'd grown comfortable with it. But today, that silence was about to be shattered. He first heard it around noon when the heat was at its worst. A sound so faint he thought it might be the wind playing tricks on his tired mind. Jack pulled Thunder to a stop and listened. There it was again, a human voice, weak and desperate, carried across the desert by the hot breeze. His first instinct was to keep riding. Getting involved in other people's troubles had never ended well for him. But something in that voice, the raw terror, the plea for life itself, made him pause. Thunder shifted beneath him, sensing his rider's hesitation. Jack squinted against the brutal sunlight, scanning the horizon. Nothing but rocks and sand and the skeletal remains of ancient Joshua trees. Then he saw it, a thin column of smoke rising in the distance, maybe 2 miles away. His gut told him to leave it alone. His conscience told him something different. He urged Thunder forward, following the smoke. As they drew closer, the voice became clearer. It was a woman, and she was screaming. Not in pain, but in fear, pure, primal fear that made Jack's blood run cold. He'd heard that kind of screaming before, on battlefields where men faced death and knew there was no escape. Whatever was happening ahead, it was bad. The scene came into view gradually. A overturned stagecoach lay on its side like a dying animal, one wheel still spinning slowly in the air. Bodies were scattered around it, 3 men, all dead, their blood already being absorbed by the thirsty sand. Arrows protruded from 2 of them. Apache, Jack realized. His jaw tightened. The raiders had hit fast and hard, taking what they wanted and leaving nothing but death behind. But someone had survived. Pinned beneath the stagecoach, partially hidden by its shadow, was a woman. Her dress was torn and dusty, her dark hair matted with sweat and blood. One of her legs was trapped under the heavy wooden frame, and she was frantically trying to pull herself free. When she saw Jack approaching, her eyes went wide with a mixture of hope and terror. "Please," she gasped, her voice cracking with desperation. "Please don't leave me here to die. They'll come back. I know they'll come back." Jack dismounted slowly, his eyes scanning the surrounding rocks and ridges. She was right. The Apache often circled back to check their kills, to take scalps and any valuables they might have missed. He could see their tracks leading away to the north, but tracks could be deceiving. They might be watching right now, waiting to see if anyone would come to help. The woman saw his hesitation and panic flooded her face. "Please," she begged again, reaching out toward him with a trembling hand. "I have money. I have jewelry. Take whatever you want, just don't leave me here." Jack looked at her trapped leg, then at the massive stagecoach. Getting her free would take time they might not have. Every instinct he developed during years of surviving in this harsh land told him to mount Thunder and ride away fast. But when he looked into her eyes and saw the raw terror there, he knew he couldn't do it. He'd left too many people behind in his life. He couldn't leave another. "I'm not leaving," he said quietly, dropping to his knees beside the coach. "But we need to move fast." Jack's hands moved quickly, assessing the situation with the practiced efficiency of a man who'd solved desperate problems before. The stagecoach had flipped onto its side, and one of the support beams had come down directly across the woman's left leg just above the ankle. She was lucky. If the beam had landed a few inches higher, it would have crushed her knee, and she'd never walk again. If it had landed lower, it might have severed her foot entirely. But lucky was relative when you were trapped in Apache territory with the sun beating down and death waiting in the rocks. "What's your name?" Jack asked, keeping his voice calm as he examined the beam. "Catherine," she managed between ragged breaths. "Catherine Wells. I was traveling to meet my brother in Silver Creek. He's a doctor there." "Well, Catherine, I'm going to get you out, but I need you to stay calm and do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" She nodded, though her face was pale with pain and fear. Jack could see where the beam had her pinned, not crushing, but wedged tight enough that pulling would only cause damage. He'd need to lift the entire corner of the stagecoach to free her, and that was going to be a problem. He stood and studied the overturned coach. It was a Concorde stagecoach, the kind that could carry 9 passengers in relative comfort. Empty, it weighed close to 2,000 pounds. Loaded with luggage and mail, it could be closer to 3,000. Even flipped on its side, trying to lift it alone was madness. But Jack had learned long ago that madness was sometimes the only option. "I'm going to try to lever it up," he told Catherine. "When I do, you pull yourself free as fast as you can. Don't worry about being gentle. Just get out. Understand?" She nodded again, her fingers digging into the sand as she prepared herself. Jack grabbed a sturdy piece of wood from the wreckage, part of the driver's seat that had broken off in the crash. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do. He wedged it under the beam that trapped Catherine's leg and positioned a rock as a fulcrum point. "On 3, he said. 1, 2, 3. Jack threw all his weight onto the lever. The wood groaned and bent but held. The stagecoach lifted, maybe an inch, maybe 2. Catherine screamed and yanked at her leg, but it wouldn't come free. The angle was wrong. Jack's muscles burned as he fought to hold the coach up, veins standing out on his neck and forehead. Then the wood snapped with a crack like a gunshot, and the coach slammed back down. Catherine sobbed in pain and frustration. Jack stood there panting, his mind racing. He looked at Thunder, then back at the coach. It was insane, but it might work. He moved quickly to his horse and untied his lariat, 50 feet of strong rope that had pulled many a stubborn calf and more than one mired wagon wheel. He looped one end around the top rail of the stagecoach and tied it tight, then brought the other end to Thunder. The horse watched him with intelligent eyes as Jack secured the rope to the saddle horn. Thunder was strong, had pulled Jack out of a river once when he'd fallen through ice, but this was asking a lot. "Easy, boy," Jack murmured, positioning Thunder at the right angle. "Just like pulling stumps back home." He moved back to Catherine. "When the coach starts to move, you pull. Use your arms, your good leg, everything you've got. This is our one chance." Jack took Thunder's reins and began walking backward, clicking his tongue. "Come on, boy. Pull." Thunder leaned into the rope. The muscles in his haunches bunched and strained. The rope went taut as a guitar string. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, inch by agonizing inch, the stagecoach began to lift and tilt. The beam across Catherine's leg shifted. "Now!" Jack shouted. Catherine pulled with everything she had. Her leg scraped against the beam, tearing fabric and skin, but it was moving. Thunder kept pulling, the rope creaking under the strain. Then suddenly Catherine was free, scrambling away from the coach on her hands and knees. Jack immediately moved to Thunder's head. "Whoa, boy. Whoa." The horse stopped pulling, and the stagecoach settled back with a crash. Jack ran to Catherine, who had collapsed in the sand, clutching her injured leg. Blood seeped through her torn dress, but he could see immediately that nothing was broken. Badly bruised and scraped, but not broken. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her dust-covered face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." Jack was about to respond when Thunder suddenly whinnied and stamped his feet, a warning. Jack's hand dropped to his gun as he spun around, scanning the rocks. There, on the ridge to the north, he saw them. 3 Apache warriors on horseback, watching. They'd come back, just as Catherine had feared. One of them raised a rifle and fired. The shot kicked up sand 3 feet from Jack's boots. "Can you ride?" Jack asked urgently. I don't know. My leg. Can you stay on a horse?" She looked at the warriors, who were now starting down the slope toward them. "Yes." "Then we ride. Now." Jack hauled Catherine to her feet, and she cried out as weight came down on her injured leg. There was no time for gentleness. He half dragged, half carried her to Thunder, who was dancing nervously, sensing the danger. The Apache warriors were closing fast, their horses sure-footed on the rocky terrain. "Up," Jack commanded, lacing his fingers together to make a stirrup. Catherine grabbed the saddle horn and Jack lifted, practically throwing her onto Thunder's back. She gasped in pain but held on. Jack swung up behind her in one fluid motion, his arm wrapping around her waist to keep her steady. "Hold tight," he said, and kicked Thunder into a gallop. The horse exploded forward, powerful legs eating up the ground. Behind them, Jack heard the Apache war cries, high, ululating sounds that turned his blood to ice. More shots rang out, the bullets whining past them like angry hornets. Jack leaned low over Thunder's neck, pulling Catherine down with him. The horse needed no urging, he ran like the devil himself was on their heels. The desert floor was treacherous, rocks, go for holes, and patches of loose sand that could break a horse's leg or send a rider flying. But Thunder was desert-bred and desert-wise. He wove through obstacles with the instinct of a creature born to this harsh land. Jack risked a glance back. The Apache were gaining. Their horses were lighter, built for this terrain, and they weren't carrying double. "There," Catherine shouted, pointing ahead. "Those rocks." Jack saw what she meant, a jumble of massive boulders creating a natural maze about half a mile ahead. It was their only chance. In open ground, the Apache would run them down within minutes. But in those rocks, the advantage would shift. Horses couldn't navigate that terrain. It would become a fight on foot, and Jack liked those odds better. Thunder seemed to understand the plan. The horse put on a burst of speed that Jack didn't know he had left. The rocks grew closer, 50 yards, 40, 30. Another bullet struck a stone to their right, sending chips of rock flying. 20 yards. 10. Then they were in the maze, and Jack yanked Thunder to a sliding stop. "Off," he barked. He didn't wait for Catherine to dismount, he grabbed her and pulled her down, then slapped Thunder's rump. "Go home, boy. Go." The horse bolted deeper into the rocks, and Jack pulled Catherine between two boulders just as the Apache reached the entrance to the maze. He pressed her against the stone, his hand over her mouth to muffle any sound. His other hand held his rifle, ready. The warriors slowed, conferring in their own language. Jack understood enough Apache to catch the meaning. They were debating whether to follow on foot or wait. One of them, the youngest by the sound of his voice, wanted to rush in. The leader, older and more cautious, argued for patience. Time was on their side. The white man and woman couldn't escape. Eventually, they'd have to come out, and when they did, they'd die. But the young warrior was eager for glory. Jack heard him dismount, and then the sound of careful footsteps on stone. He was coming in alone. The leader called after him, a warning or maybe a curse, but the young warrior kept coming. Jack released Catherine and moved silently to a gap between rocks. He could see the young Apache now, maybe 20 years old, rifle held ready, eyes scanning the maze. The warrior moved like a cat, each step deliberate and quiet. But Jack had learned to hunt in these rocks during the war. He knew how to be a shadow. The Apache passed within 3 feet of Jack's hiding spot, close enough that Jack could have reached out and touched him. The warrior's attention was focused ahead, deeper into the maze where he thought his prey had gone. Jack waited until the man was past, then stepped out behind him. "Drop it," Jack said quietly in Apache. The young warrior spun, bringing his rifle around, and Jack had no choice. His gun boomed in the confined space, the shot echoing off the rocks like thunder. The Apache fell, and Jack immediately moved, knowing the others would come now. He grabbed Catherine's hand. "Run," he commanded. They scrambled deeper into the maze, Catherine limping badly but keeping pace through sheer willpower. Behind them, Jack heard the other 2 warriors enter the rocks. They were shouting now, anger and grief mixed together. The young one must have been family. That made this personal, and personal meant they wouldn't stop until Jack and Catherine were dead. The maze twisted and turned, some passages wide enough to walk through, others so narrow they had to squeeze sideways. Jack's mind raced, trying to remember the layout from his years of wandering these lands. There was a way through, he was sure of it, a path that would lead them out the far side, but which way? A bullet ricocheted off the stone near his head, and he pulled Catherine down another passage. They emerged into a small clearing surrounded by high rock walls. Dead end. Jack cursed under his breath. The Apache voices were getting closer. They were being herded, driven into a trap. "Can you climb?" Jack asked Catherine, looking up at the rocks. She followed his gaze to a narrow chimney between 2 boulders, a vertical crack maybe 20 feet high. At the top, Jack could see blue sky. It was their only way out. "I'll have to," she said. Jack went first, wedging himself into the narrow chimney between the 2 massive boulders. The rock was rough against his back and palms, hot from the relentless sun. He pushed with his legs and pulled with his arms, inching upward in the ancient technique climbers called chimneying. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest, but he kept moving. Below him, Catherine waited, her eyes darting between Jack and the passage they'd come through. Any moment now, the Apache would appear. Jack reached the top and pulled himself over the edge, his chest heaving. He looked down at Catherine, who stood 20 feet below, her face pale with pain and fear. "Your turn," he called quietly. "Put your back against one side and your feet against the other. Don't look down. Just keep moving up." Catherine positioned herself in the chimney and started to climb. She was doing well for the first 10 feet, but then her injured leg buckled. She slipped down 3 feet before catching herself, crying out involuntarily. The sound echoed through the rocks like a bell, and Jack heard the Apache voices immediately change direction. They were coming. "Keep climbing," Jack urged. "Don't stop." He lay flat on the rock, his rifle aimed at the clearing below. Catherine was 12 feet up now, struggling with every inch. Her hands were bleeding from gripping the rough stone, and her injured leg was barely supporting any weight. Sweat poured down her face, mixing with tears of pain and determination. The first Apache appeared in the clearing, the leader, Jack guessed. He was older than the warrior Jack had shot, maybe 40, with gray streaks in his long black hair. His face was painted for war, and his eyes held the cold fury of a man who'd lost someone he loved. He looked up and saw Catherine in the chimney, saw Jack on the rock above with his rifle aimed down. For a moment, nobody moved. The Apache leader held his rifle loosely, not pointed at anyone. He could shoot Catherine easily, she was trapped, helpless in the chimney. But he didn't. Instead, he spoke in heavily accented English. "You killed my nephew. My sister's son. Now I must kill you. This is the way." "I didn't want to kill him," Jack replied, keeping his rifle steady. "But he didn't give me a choice. Let us go. Nobody else needs to die today." The Apache leader shook his head slowly. "You think you can make demands? You are trapped. Your woman cannot climb faster than a bullet. You cannot shoot us all before we kill you. There is no escape." He was right, and they both knew it. The second warrior appeared at the passage entrance, his rifle raised. Catherine was 15 feet up now, so close, but the last 5 feet were the hardest. Her strength was failing. Jack made a decision. He stood up, keeping his rifle aimed at the Apache leader but stepping back from the edge. "Catherine," he called down. "When I say go, you climb as fast as you can. Don't stop for anything. You hear me? Nothing." "What are you doing?" she gasped. "Giving you a chance. Go." Jack fired his rifle, not at the Apache, but at the rock wall above the clearing. The bullet struck and ricocheted, sending stone chips flying. The Apache dove for cover, and in that instant, Jack dropped his rifle, leaned over the edge, and grabbed Catherine's wrists. He pulled with everything he had, hauling her up the last 5 feet. Her feet scrambled against the rock, and then she was over the edge, collapsing beside him. Bullets immediately started hitting the rock around them. Jack grabbed Catherine and rolled them both behind a larger boulder as the stone erupted in sparks and dust. They were at the top of the maze now, a relatively flat expanse of rock that stretched for 50 yards before dropping away again. Beyond that, Jack could see more desert, more rocks, and in the far distance, the purple haze of mountains. "Can you walk?" he asked Catherine. "I can run if I have to," she said through gritted teeth. They ran. Behind them, Jack could hear the Apache climbing the chimney. It would take them time, they were being cautious now, knowing Jack might be waiting at the top, but they would come. They had to. Honor demanded it. Jack and Catherine reached the far edge of the rock expanse and looked down. It was a steep slope, loose scree and sand, dropping 20 feet to more level ground. Not a cliff, but dangerous. One wrong step and you'd tumble all the way down, breaking bones and maybe your neck. "We have to slide," Jack said. He sat down on the edge and pulled Catherine beside him. "Lean back, keep your legs out front, and try to control your speed. Ready?" Before she could answer, he pushed off, taking her with him. They slid down the slope in a cascade of sand and small rocks, half sliding, half falling. Jack dug his heels in to slow their descent, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche. They hit the bottom hard, both tumbling into a heap. Jack rolled to his feet immediately, helping Catherine up. Behind them, at the top of the slope, the 2 Apache warriors appeared. The leader looked down at them, and even from that distance, Jack could see the respect in his eyes. They had fought well, escaped what should have been certain death. But the chase wasn't over. The Apache leader raised his rifle, and Jack knew they were in his range now. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. This was where it ended. Then a sound split the desert air, a sound that made Jack's heart leap with impossible hope. A gunshot, but not from the Apache. It came from behind Jack, from the desert floor. He spun around and saw them, a patrol of cavalry soldiers, maybe a dozen strong, riding hard toward them. The Apache saw them too. The leader lowered his rifle and looked at Jack one last time. Then he and his companion simply vanished, disappearing back into the rocks like ghosts. The cavalry reached Jack and Catherine moments later, their horses kicking up clouds of dust. A lieutenant dismounted, his face concerned. "Are you folks all right? We heard shooting." Jack looked at Catherine, who was swaying on her feet, exhausted and hurting but alive. "We are now," he said. The cavalry escort brought Jack and Catherine into Silver Creek 2 days later. The town was small but prosperous, built around a creek that ran year-round, a miracle in this parched land. White buildings lined the main street, and the sound of a piano drifted from the saloon. It looked peaceful, civilized, a world away from the violence they'd escaped. Catherine's brother met them at the edge of town. Dr. Thomas Wells was a tall man with kind eyes and capable hands. He took one look at his sister's injured leg and immediately swept into action, carrying her to his clinic despite her protests that she could walk. Jack followed, suddenly feeling out of place in his dusty trail clothes and 3 days of stubble. The doctor worked on Catherine's leg while Jack waited outside, drinking coffee that the doctor's assistant brought him. It was the first real coffee he'd had in weeks, and it tasted like heaven. Through the window, he could hear Catherine telling her brother what had happened, the attack, the stagecoach, being trapped. And Jack. She talked about Jack pulling her free, Jack fighting off the Apache, Jack risking his life again and again for a woman he didn't even know. When the doctor emerged an hour later, his expression was serious but not grim. "She'll be fine," he told Jack. "The leg is badly bruised and cut up, but nothing's broken. She'll need to stay off it for a few weeks, but she'll walk again without any limp. You got her out just in time. Another hour in that sun, and she'd be dead." Jack nodded, setting down his empty coffee cup. "I'm glad she's all right. I should be moving on now." "Moving on? Where?" Jack shrugged. "Somewhere. Anywhere. I was heading here, but now that I've arrived, I realize I don't have any business in Silver Creek." "You have business with me," Catherine called from inside the clinic. "Come in here, please." Jack hesitated, then walked into the examination room. Catherine was sitting on the edge of a bed, her leg bandaged and propped up on pillows. Despite everything she'd been through, her eyes were clear and determined. "I owe you my life," she said simply. "And I always pay my debts." "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do." "That's not true, and you know it." Catherine looked at her brother, then back at Jack. "Tom was just telling me before the attack that he needs help. This town is growing fast, and he can't handle his practice and the ranch he inherited from our father. The ranch has been sitting empty for 6 months because he doesn't have anyone he can trust to run it." Jack felt his stomach tighten. He knew where this was going. "I'm not a rancher anymore." "But you were once," Catherine said. "I can tell by the way you sit a horse, the way you handled that rope. And Tom needs someone who can handle trouble, someone who doesn't run when things get dangerous. You proved you're that man." Dr. Wells stepped forward. "It's 200 acres, good water, decent grazing. The house needs work, but it's sound. I'd pay you a fair wage to manage it, and after 2 years, I'd sell you half interest. After 5, it's yours free and clear." Jack stared at them both. It was everything he'd lost back east: land, purpose, a future. But it was also terrifying. Having something meant you could lose it again. Having people you cared about meant you could watch them die. He tried the isolated drifter life precisely to avoid that pain. "I don't know," he said quietly. "I left that life behind for a reason." Catherine reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong despite everything she'd endured. "Jack, may I call you Jack? I've been running too. After my husband died 2 years ago, I told myself I'd never let anyone close again. It was safer that way. Easier. But lying in that desert, trapped and waiting to die, I realized something. Safety isn't living. It's just existing. And I don't want to just exist anymore." Jack looked into her eyes and saw something that shook him to his core: hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. Not the desperate hope of someone facing death, but the brave hope of someone choosing to live fully despite knowing the risks. "What happened to your husband?" he asked softly. "Cholera. Quick and cruel. I watched him die over 3 days, helpless to do anything. When it was over, I packed up everything and ran. I told myself I was coming to help my brother, but really I was running away from the memories, from the pain. And now." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Now I think maybe I was running toward something instead. Toward here. Toward this moment. Call it fate or providence or just blind luck, but you found me in that desert for a reason, Jack. And I think maybe I was supposed to help save you too." Jack was quiet for a long moment. Outside, he could hear Silver Creek going about its business, people living their lives, building their futures, taking risks every day just by caring about each other. He thought about Thunder, who'd trusted him enough to pull that stagecoach. He thought about Catherine, who'd kept climbing even when her leg was failing. Courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. "Tell me about this ranch," he said finally. Dr. Wells grinned and pulled out a map. For the next hour, they talked about water rights and grazing patterns, about what needed fixing and what could wait. Jack found himself getting drawn in despite his reservations. He asked questions he hadn't thought about in years. Where did the creek run? What kind of cattle? Was the range fenced? Catherine watched him talk, and her smile grew wider. She'd been right. This man who'd saved her wasn't running from something, he'd been running toward something without knowing it. Just like her. 3 months later, Jack stood on the porch of the ranch house watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The house was fixed up now, new roof, repaired windows, a porch that didn't creak with every step. Thunder grazed in the pasture with a dozen other horses. Cattle dotted the range, their brands fresh and clear. The sound of a wagon approaching made him turn. Catherine drove up in the buckboard, her leg fully healed now. She'd insisted on staying in town at first, helping her brother with his practice while Jack got the ranch operational. But she visited every week, and each visit lasted a little longer. She climbed down from the wagon without help, she'd made it clear she didn't need rescuing anymore, and walked to the porch. "The place looks good," she said. "It's coming along. Still a lot of work to do." "There's always work to do. That's life." She stood beside him, looking out at the same sunset. "I brought you something." She handed him a letter. Jack opened it and read quickly, his eyes widening. It was a deed, for half the ranch, signed by Dr. Wells. "But it's only been 3 months. He said 2 years. Tom says you've done 2 years of work in 3 months. Besides, he's getting married next month to Sarah Thompson, the school teacher. They're going to need the money from the land sale to build a new house." Catherine paused. "There's one condition though." "What's that?" "You have to promise not to run if things get difficult. Or if they get good. Whichever scares you more." Jack looked at her and saw the truth written plainly on her face. Somewhere between that desperate day in the desert and this perfect evening on the ranch, between death and life, between running and standing still, they'd both found something neither had been looking for. "What if I mess it up?" he asked quietly. "What if I let you down?" "Then we'll fix it together. That's what people do, Jack. They stick around. They don't leave each other to die in the desert, literally or figuratively." Jack thought about that day, about the choice he'd made to stop and help instead of riding away. It had cost him his solitude, his carefully maintained distance from the world. It had forced him to care again, to risk again, to hope again. It had cost him everything he'd built to protect himself. And he'd gained everything that mattered. He reached out and took Catherine's hand. "I'm not running," he said. She squeezed his hand and smiled. "Good. Because I'm not either." They stood together on the porch as the sun disappeared below the horizon, two people who'd found each other in the most desperate of circumstances and chosen to stay. The desert stretched out before them, still harsh, still unforgiving, but somehow less empty than before. Jack had learned the truth that day in the rocks. Real courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. It was about saving someone even when the cost might be everything. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, what you gained was worth infinitely more than what you lost. The stars began to appear overhead, countless points of light in the darkening sky. Jack looked up at them and felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. Not the peace of isolation, but the peace of purpose. The peace of home. "Thank you," Catherine said softly, "for not leaving me there to die." "Thank you," Jack replied, "for not letting me stay dead inside." And in the gathering darkness of the desert night, with the promise of tomorrow ahead of them, they began to build a life together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one brave step forward at a time.